2, 1.
Welcome to the Board of Education Audit Committee meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order. Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call, please?
Sorry, I was renaming Barbara. Renette Apodaca,
Here.
Sarah Brownstein,
Here.
Sofina Dominguez,
Here.
Scott Elder,
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez. I know she logged in. Danielle Gonzalez, Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Here.
Barbara Peterson,
I see her.
Here. I'm here.
great, thank you, Barbara. Heather Sneddon,
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Here.
Peggy Mola.
Here. And I think Danielle is there.
Yes.
I'm here. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay, community members may attend APS Board of Education meetings in person at the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex, 6400 Uptown Boulevard, or watch the live stream on the APS Board of Education YouTube channel. Our next item for consideration and action is adoption of the June 27th, 2023 audit meeting agenda and approval of the September 28th, 2022 and April 25th, 2023 audit committee meeting minutes. If I could have a motion.
I move to adopt the June 27th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting agenda and approve the September 28th, 2022 and April 25th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting minutes. This is Josefina.
And
I'll
if I-
second. This is Danielle.
Great, thank you. Okay, roll call, please, Dr. Albright.
Renette Apodaca,
Here.
Sarah Brownstein,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Scott Elder,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Heather Sneddon,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Peggy Mola Aragon.
Yes. Okay, our next item for consideration is the External Audit Conference of APS for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. Mr. Turnbull. Yeah, are you going to do it, Ms. Apodaca?
Yes, thank you. so much.
Okay,
So good morning. I'm going to introduce Amanda Boyle, the controller for APS, and Mark Turnbull, the executive director of accounting. Every agency and governmental entity has to be audited every year per state law. APS is required to choose a new auditor at least every 8 years and through the RFP process. And this is the 6th year for Moss Adams. Today's meeting is the entrance conference for the 2022-2023 audit. New Mexico state statute requires monthly updates to the audit committee during the audit field process, and those are normally held monthly. And then the exit conference is held in October. So do we have Ms. Sheila Herrera from Moss Adams? She's on. Okay,
Good morning.
go ahead and give it over to Sheila.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. In your packet, you have the presentation that we have put together for the entrance conference piece. And so we will start here at the top with the service team. As an introduction, my name is Sheila Herrera. I am a partner with Moss Adams, and I have been with the firm about 16 years and am in charge of the entire Albuquerque Public School audit, including all of the component units, which includes the foundation and all of the charter schools. We also have another partner on the team, Ashley Austin, and she is responsible for the quality control review, making sure that we are completing the audit in accordance with the AICPA requirements, and then that the financial statements ultimately meet the requirements of the GASB standards. On our team for the district, we have the same team that we have had the last 2 years, both at the senior manager level, the manager, and then the senior that will be involved in the audit process. We are required to, or we have been hired to perform the audit for the June 30th, 2023 year end. As part of the audit process, we do assist with preparing some of the schedules on statements that go into the financial statements. Those include some of the footnotes on the combined pieces for all the charter schools, all the appendix amounts that go into the charter schools, all of the schedules related to the GASB 68 and 75, which is the proportionate share of the pension liability schedules, and then the corresponding notes on those schedules, and then the schedules related to the other post-employment benefit liabilities. And then we do assist with all the combining statements for all of the component units. And that's on page 5 is where I'm at in the presentation. As part of the auditor responsibilities, we're responsible for making sure that the financial statements are materially correct. And so we do calculate a materiality each year. That materiality is based on a number of qualitative and quantitative factors, and based off the activity within the district. We have multiple opinion units as the auditors that we are calculating the materiality on. The government-wide statements is the largest of the opinion units that has all the activity for the district. And then each of the major funds has its own materiality that we do calculate within the financial statements themselves. And so even though we are auditing the financial statements, management is ultimately responsible for those financial statements, making sure that they are complete, that they meet the GASB requirements, that there's no disclosures that are missing from the financial statements. We are required to follow the AICPA standards in regards to completing the audit. We also have to follow the Yellow Book standards, which is the GAGAS requirements, because we do have a federal compliance audit that we are also performing as part of the financial statement audit. In addition to that, we are required to follow the rules under the New Mexico State Audit Rule. The state auditor has several requirements that they require of us to be able to do as part of the audit process. And so that includes looking at things like travel and per diem, procurement, some of the budget adjustment requests, all of the cash reconciliations for each of the quarters are a small number of the things that the state auditor requires of us. As part of the audit process, we start doing some planning, which is taking place this week, along with some interim work. We're looking specifically at the controls of the district and looking to make sure that the district is following any policies and procedures that are in place. We're looking for making sure that the documentation around those controls exists. We can see that whether that's in electronic form or on paper. And so then we're also starting the planning for the federal compliance audit, looking at the schedule of federal expenditures and seeing which major programs we will be auditing for the current year. So even though we are looking at internal controls, we don't necessarily provide an opinion on internal controls. If something does come to our attention during the audit process, we are required to communicate those issues with management and then determine whether any of those issues rise to the level of a significant deficiency or material weakness. And so the next step in the audit process is we would then look to our audit procedures to see how we're going to complete the rest of the audit. And so some of that is through analytics, and then the rest of it is through test of details, which means that we're pulling a number of supporting documentation in order to support any of the balances that are presented into the financial statements, both on the balance sheet and then on the statement of revenues and expenditures. And so again, anything that we do find, we are required to communicate that to management, and then that subsequently gets communicated to the audit committee. Moving on to page 7, we do have some group audit requirements that we are required to communicate. And so we do audit, like I mentioned, the component units, which includes the Albuquerque Public Schools Foundation. And then we also have the charter schools that are included in there. Each of the charter schools, along with Albuquerque Public School Foundation, has its own audit. We have to go through and calculate materialities for each of the levels of what activity is in each one of these component units. And then within the charter schools, we do also have 11 foundations that each of those charter schools has that we have to also audit as well. So next page, audit areas of audit emphasis. As part of the audit work, we spend a significant amount of time looking at revenue, looking at all the grant awards to make sure that they have been captured appropriately, because the district is operating on a modified cash basis. All the accrual entries usually just take place once a year. And so management works to make sure that the financial statements are presented in accordance with GAAP. So as part of that, we're typically looking at cutoff and making sure all of those accrual adjustments, including all the revenue, has been properly accounted for. We do quite a bit to make sure that all those accrual adjustments make sense and that there's nothing missing from the financial statements. The IBNR and the claims expense, we look at the claim samples, at some of the claims expenses and sample that to make sure that we could see all those claims being paid. And then there's an actuarial study that gets done at the end of the year to determine what that IBNR is. And so we're looking at the lag reports subsequent to year end to determine that the valuation makes sense and there's nothing in there that looks like the liabilities should be higher than what's being calculated by that actual actuarial that's being done. Next page. The debt, we do confirm all the debt balances. We're looking at the bonds. Anytime there's a change in the bonds or any new bonds, we're looking to make sure that those have been appropriately recorded. Anytime there's a refunding, we're looking at those adjustments as those are very complex under the GASB. And so making sure that those have been properly accounted for and disclosed in the financial statements. And then the compliance with the federal grant program. Because you receive federal dollars, and the dollars are significant, we are required to go in and determine which major funds are going to be audited in the current year. And so there is a formula to that. If they've been audited in the last 2 years, they may or may not have to have an audit in the current year. If the amounts are over a certain dollar threshold and they have never been audited, they will automatically require us to audit that program in the current year. And so sometimes we have 2 programs here that we're auditing. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 1. It does range based off the level of the amount of federal dollars that are being expended in the single fiscal year and based off what has been audited in the prior year. Next page. As part of the audit process, we are required to do a risk assessment during the planning process. And so as part of that risk assessment, we do look to determine, is there anything at the district where we feel there could be additional risk specifically related to fraud? And so we do set up our audit procedures for any of those risks that we do think are fraud risks. And so that does change from year to year. And we do also look to have some discussions with management. We're looking to make sure that if there is something that, we are asking management about fraud specifically, we do have various conversations with the audit committee members at various times. Also, just to have an idea if there's anything else that we need to look at during the audit process where we think there could be a risk specifically related to fraud. The audit itself is not necessarily designed to find fraud, but if something does come to our attention, we are required to communicate that both to management and to the state auditor. And we are required to perform procedures to determine what the additional risk could be to the audit or to the financial statements. Next slide. So here's the audit timeline that we go through. So we start meeting with management in the springtime, coming up with a plan of what we want to change for the current year audit, start getting all of our request lists together for the audit. As part of the audit process, we pull thousands of documents. And so it does take management some time to get all of those things accumulated as we start to begin the audit fieldwork. And so this week we do have some planning going on and looking at internal controls. Next week we have some single audit planning time and control testing that we're starting to look at, along with some of the compliance that has already happened through the April-May timeframe. Obviously, today's the entrance conference, and then September is when we start looking at final field work for the district. And then with the goal to obviously have met the state audit rule deadline. We haven't missed it yet, so that's not the plan. We plan to be on time like every year. We look to try to get the financial statements to the state auditors by the November 1st timeline, just because the financial statements are very large and we like to get everything done ahead of that 11/15 timeline. Audit deliverables on the next page. And so we do issue multiple reports within your financial statements. The first is a report of the independent auditors. This is just a report over the financial statements themselves, any required supplementary information that's included in the financial statements, and then any supplementary information that's included in the financial statements. There's also a paragraph included on that first report related to the statistical section in the financial statements that we do look over to make sure that it's complete and concise, but we don't provide an opinion on the statistical section itself. The second report is the report on internal control or financial reporting. This is our yellow book report. This is the report that basically says that we've looked at the internal controls in the financial statements and over compliance, and we're providing some level of assurance that there's no, there is either findings or there's not. This is where those statements would go. And that identifies what is considered a significant deficiency or a material weakness. On the third report, we do issue the report on compliance for each of the major programs that we're auditing as part of the federal grant compliance piece. And so any programs are listed in the schedule of findings and question costs. And then those are the programs that we are providing the opinion on. We do issue separate reports for the foundation and then some of the charter schools. There's 8 charter schools that do request standalones that we do issue their own opinions on. The rest of the opinions are included within the district financial statements. And then as part of the audit process, once everything is completed, there is a data collection form that is submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse for all of the federal grant dollars, along with the finalized financial statement that goes to the feds to show that the audit is complete, and then the results of the audit. Next page. And so as part of the process, the expectation, of course, is that the district will be prepared and that all the PBCs in the CAP schedule will be provided on time. We do have a new secure portal that we are using this year that hopefully will keep everything a little bit more organized. We do expect at some point, once we get to final field work and the financial statements, our balances are beginning to be audited, that we have minimal adjustments. We always expect some level of adjustments, but we really try to minimize that as much as possible. If there are adjustments that we identify, those are communicated with management immediately. Anytime there is a finding that we have, that's communicated with management immediately to determine whether we missed something as the auditors, if it's truly a finding that needs to be in the report. And then any restatements, we haven't had anything at the district level, only at the charter school level in the past few years. So I don't foresee that being an issue in the current year. And then next page, we do have a new GASB requirement this year. Last year, you probably remember the leases was the new GASB requirement. This year, it is the subscription-based information technology arrangements. And so similar to the lease accounting, this does require management to take a look at this, determine whether there's adjustments that need to be made into the financial statements. I know management is currently working on this and have a big task ahead of them for the next couple of months to kind of get through determining how this impacts the financial statements. There are a lot of agreements, as you can imagine, related to information technology, and so going through those and determine what's falling under the standard. And that is it as far as entrance conference communication. Are there any questions from the committee?
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Brownstein.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. I just wanted to, I don't know if anybody had noticed, but Sheila's title changed from the last time we saw her. And I just wanted to congratulate her on making partner with Moss Adams.
Thank you very much.
Yay, good for you, Ms. Herrera.
Congratulations.
Okay, anything else? Okay. The only thing I have, Ms. Herrera, I know last year we were kind of worried about getting everything in on time. So, I mean, we were holding our breath and that ended up working out okay. So you don't anticipate the same this year?
No, in fact, I think Mark and Amanda have been working to tackle all of the issues that were kind of driving some of the things that got us delayed last year. And so I think we're trying to push as much of that as we can up front.
Okay. And then I know, and I probably might have asked this last year, I know just because we have so much money from, you know, the federal government through CARISA funds and ARPA funds and ESSER funds and whatever all the acronyms are. So that will pretty much be the same this year. Did you find any more difficulty because we had so much more money than we have in the past when it comes to federal, you know, federal funds?
No, I mean, the great thing about the district is all of the federal dollars are accounted for exactly the same and processed exactly the same. And so we don't have any issues obtaining any of the records or doing any of the audits. It seems like everything is, even though we have additional funding, you know, there's nothing unusual in there.
Okay. And then I know that you know, you always mention this when it comes to that you are not supposed to, you're not designed to find fraud, right? So you're not designed to do that. So why do you say that? I mean, because you're looking at something, I think you said specific to fraud, but you're not designed to find it. So how is it found? Is it really internally then?
You know, it depends. I would say most fraud that we're aware of is found internally. The audit itself, we do perform risk assessment, but again, we are not specifically going out looking for fraud, and that is not what we are hired to do. We are not the forensic accountants. We are hired to make sure that the financial statements are materially correct.
Okay. I think that's all. I think that's all that I had. If nobody else has anything, we can be.
I'd like to follow up on that, Peggy.
Okay, go ahead, Member Dominguez.
So I was wondering when you mentioned that your purpose was to determine risk for fraud. Is that correct?
We do look at it as part of our risk assessment process. And so we're looking sometimes at things like management override of controls is one high risk area that we look at where, you know, you could have controls in place, and can management come in and override those controls or change the controls for one transaction or certain types of transactions, for example.
And so your company has it ever found that APS was high risk in any particular area, or do we come out, how do we score on that?
It just depends, and it changes from year to year based off your controls that you currently have in place, maybe based off the level of activity. Obviously, student activity funds tend to be higher risk because you have cash involved there. And there's multiple people that handle cash at various locations. And so we do additional procedures there, and in accordance with state audit rule, we have to look at those, making sure that we can see that there's proper documentation in place, that we can see the deposits, that all of that reconciles out from what the school says that is being collected back to what is actually being deposited into those bank accounts. Obviously, things can be manipulated in certain ways. And again, we're looking at it from the documentation perspective.
Sure. Yeah, and I think our staff does do, I think they do a remarkable job of staying on top of things. So thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. And I mean, just to follow up to what Ms. Dominguez said, when it comes to the override of controls that can happen by management, is that addressed, superintendent, in directives, policies at all? Do you know?
You guys want? Or that?
Well, we expect certain behavior from all our APS staff to follow the procedures and directives. So we do our best not to allow that to happen. Can I say it?
It's like a written directive. You can't say that though. Okay. I don't know if that's.
The permissions are actually in our ERP system. So as we set up our approvers and our users, those internal controls are in the system. So if they tried to override something, they wouldn't have the permission to do it.
Okay, so it would take extra steps to be able to override.
Well, that's to say there's a process and it's pretty well laid out. I mean, there's, just as an approver, as an example, there's 2 tiers of approval I have. I don't have any ability to do anything other than to go in. I can look at the documents that are attached to demonstrate there's invoices, to demonstrate that there's any sort of documentation justification for the purchase. And I can approve that, but that's all I can do. I can't go in and modify it. I can't go in and shift the fund. I can't go in and, transfer who's the payee would be. I can just see who's supposed to be paid and the justification for why it is, and then the documentation showing me that it's the actual number. And these are steps that, quite frankly, I think we've had, but part of the thing, when Renette was still our chief procurement officer, she changed the procurement manual. We had a fairly, I think it was out of date, and I think Renette brought it into the 21st century, and then she put us all through some training. We all got retrained, and they have a more, it's a more comprehensive training than it was before. I'm now looking at documents in ways that I wasn't looking at them before, and we're also looking at them differently. for different things because the training changed the way we were supposed to consider approvals.
Yes, and kind of following on that is the separation of duties. So like the superintendent said, someone who puts in a request cannot cannot approve, and then an approver cannot issue a PO. And then once we have a PO, we have a separation of who can pay an invoice and who can issue a check. So there's separations all along that rec to check process.
Okay, so there's that like major checks and balances
Mhm.
to make sure.
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. Did you have a follow-up?
I just, could you repeat when were these changes instituted, Ms. Apaleka? When did you do a more comprehensive?
Well, they were updated. They were already in process, but they were updated, I want to say 2 years ago. And then we developed the approver training, like the superintendent said, to make sure that the approvers understood what they were looking at and kind of what their role is, because in each step of the approval process, each person is looking at it through a different set of lenses. You know, some people are looking to see if the purchase is necessary, if it's appropriate, are we using the right cost account that can be used? Is there budget? Does it meet the procurement regulations? So everyone's kind of looking at it differently, but then holistically, we have a well-rounded approval process.
Thank you.
And then Ms. Herrera, if there's anything that any of the board members has to pass on to you, they're welcome to call you. Is that correct?
That is correct. Please feel free to reach out to me at any point. Burnett has my information. She can pass that along to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Audit Committee. So I think unless there are any other questions, anything else, then we will move on. So the next Audit Committee meeting will be held on Wednesday, July 26, 2023 at 5 p.m. in the John Milne Community Boardroom of the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex on Uptown Boulevard or virtually at aps.edu. And with that, we are adjourned. Everybody have a wonderful Tuesday. Okay.